Hello and welcome to Who Caves Conversations. Again, another little special episode, especially today because we are going to talk about character's newest release, The Meep. And before we continue on with that conversation, I'm going to firstly say hello to my co-host and friend Shane. How are you, mate?
Good, thanks.
And below us here, we have Mr. D67, Al Dewar himself. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It's a very balmy sort of Sunday in early May, so it's very.
So what is it? 15 degrees?
Yeah.
And also, we are kindly joined today by Andrew Teal. Big time difference, and we're seeing the Meep now. Is there any sort of logic or issues behind that, and not why we didn't see one initially?
Yeah, well, I think it's fair. It's more than fair to say that when Doctor Who was touted around the time of the 60th, interest levels, certainly in terms of product from retailers and others, were lower than they are now. So you know, getting that out of the way, this was essentially a soft reboot, I suppose, a new era we were moving into. But we just wanted to play it softly. To do anything with the Doctor Who merchandise in terms of development is expensive. It just is. So there's a rationale to sort of wait and, with a bit of hindsight, see how things worked. So I think it's fair to say those 60th episodes were massively successful. I think people liked them in different ways. It's funny. Yeah, it was purely and simply, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, you can sort of say, actually, these were really cool episodes, and he is a pretty cool character. And it you know, it was just time changes your sort of perception. So it seemed like an obvious. We already had the 14, and I kind of wanted to re-release him in his sort of jacketless version. So the Meep seemed like and also we wanted to, you know, with all these figures, we wanted to do something a bit different. Anyway, so that was the reason. That's the reason it was delayed.
I think with the Meep, it's one of those things where we heard about the Meep coming 6 months earlier. I'm just imagining that people would necessarily think, well, if you had a 6 month lead on the Meep coming in, why couldn't we have got this product at Christmas that year? But it's kind of like saying, all right, if the BBC come out and say, we're going to bring back Frobisher. For any younger viewers don't know, that was a cartoon comic strip with a penguin as a companion. You get the 6 month lead saying, all right, we're going to work on a Frobisher figure. And then it ends up being a hyper-realistic penguin as opposed to what it looked like in the comics. So you've got to kind of wait for, the audience response to the character, which you've just attested to, Al, and then also what the design's going to look like. I mean, if you had a thought, let's push the Meep out. They're talking about a Meep coming. Let's push it out for this year. And you produce the comic version. It's a mile away from what we got in the episode, which is this almost hyper-realistic. Yeah, I think.
You have to remember the territory was slightly different back then. The emphasis was all on the 15th Doctor. There was a massive, you know, we did that regeneration set. Then there was a massive concentration of everything to do with the 15th Doctor, and Ruby and the Sonics. And off the back of that, there wasn't really a plan for everything else. So the plan for, you know, this, let's do this direct to consumer, but actually have 5 or 6 products, that plan didn't really fall into place for a good while. So, and it kind of was a plan that came and sat alongside that original Ruby and 15. So it wasn't the one led to the other. I would say they were almost sort of running in parallel, because, you know, had the 15th and Ruby figures not done well or hadn't resonated we knew there was still an audience for Doctor Who classic, I suppose you would call it, and heritage stuff. So they're kind of mutually exclusive, but the landscape was a little bit different. I suppose you could say it was us hedging our bets that if we had to pin money on anything, we were going to pin it on David Tennant, and we were going to pin it on, for that range, we were going to pin it on stuff that we knew would resonate with the collectors.
The other thing is that with the collectors, or with the community of Who, I think there was a little bit of a rumor going around that there was not going to be a meet, but I think there's a bit more of an explanation to that, to do with that toy fair, Al, if you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, well, there was again, mutually exclusive. You have to remember that toy fair back in, God, what, 23 was it, or 22? 23 must have been. And we showcased the Doctor and Ruby figures. I think we had a Wrath Warrior.
24.
Yeah, we had a Wrath Warrior mock-up that I printed out and had painted up. So we had that sat there as well, just to kind of fill the bookcase. And right down at the bottom, we had the Plush Meep. And we, I think a lot of people were excited about the Plush Meep, but it was very expensive to make. We tried several factories, and when I say several factories, I mean normally we might try 3. I think we tried about 5 or 6 with a Meep. Just could not get the cost down to a reasonable level, and it basically came down to: do we do the Meep and he's a bit crap, or do we do the Meep and he's a really cool collector item? But costing wise, I was always for the latter idea. It should be, mix of vinyl, mix of plush parts. It's actually a very complex shape to do in plush, and the factory costs just came back extortionate. I mean, you would have been talking about a 50 quid retail plus postage and packing, and I'm sure there's people out there who are like, I paid that, but I don't think so. I think there's a limit. So it was cost that basically drove that out.
You'd have to question what the target buyer would be for the Plush Meep as well. I mean, plush products generally are aimed more at the children area.
Well, so, it falls into novelty more than anything else. There's some argument to say you might have got a wider spread because you get kids, you get.
I don't think for 50 quid you're going to get kids.
But no, that's the thing. Not at 50 quid in terms of the appeal of the plush character. But it was just something that just didn't pan out. So I was quite. Once we'd sort of told the BBC, the Meep, we can't do it. We've tried. We've looked at this every which way, and we just can't make it work. Once we told them that, I was quite vocal about telling people that the Meep wasn't going to happen. So I'll start, because I'll start with the 14th Doctor, which Andrew didn't have a lot of feed into, and then I'll pass it over to him because he's much more au fait with kind of my interesting way of doing briefs and stuff, which is quite amusing, but I'm sure he'll expand on that. But basically, we had the 14th Doctor figure. When you took the jacket off that figure, he was, other than the arms, literally the Tennant figure in a waistcoat. Also, the head, the first time round, there was a bit of negative comments on that, and actually when I went back and re-looked at the tooling and the original digital file, it was obvious that the original head that we'd produced wasn't 100% brilliant to the digital file as supplied, and for whatever reason, and then having been done as a what you would call traditional Gen 2 figure, it was slathered in paint, which again wasn't the best option. So I sort of said, look, I'm not happy with the head, let's recast it. I don't know when we'll use it. So it was recast but never used. So it was sitting waiting in the wings, and then it was simply a case of commissioning the new arms to replace the jacket arms. And essentially we had the 14th figure. So I think it's significantly better than the first iteration, both from the, not being slathered in paint, but think it just looks better.
With the tartan patterns or anything, were they all the same patterns and the same printout?
Yeah, the first, so it was obviously a significantly long period of time since we'd done the original figure, and when I've got some on my desk somewhere, but when they redid that figure for me, they redid it with a horrible, they looked like the Bay City Rollers. Well, he looked like he was from the Bay City Rollers. The tartan was horrendous. But factories and the factory, in fairness, is very good. So if you say, look, this is a figure we made and we want to match to that, and they just went back and did that, and then obviously we corrected the back of the waistcoat from being tartan wasn't to being the correct sort of blue, and it's not. It kind of looks shiny on the figure. It's probably a little bit more matte than that. If you look at Mr. Tennant's tie. In those adventures, it's kind of like a rough weave, and actually the back of the waistcoat is quite similar. It's sort of quite a rough sort of weave, but there's limitations on what you can do.
Okay,
so that was for the Doctor figure, and then the Meep was a brand new thing, and I'm gonna throw that one over to Andrew because he had a huge input on that one. Bearing in mind he'd already sculpted the Meep's hands for the plush that never happened. So, you know.
Well, it started off as the hands, and then it became the feet as well, didn't it?
Yeah.
As more and more plastic got added, but then it all disappeared eventually. So when you emailed about doing the Meep, I had no idea what the character was, because you said we're doing the Meep. I'm like, what the hell's that? And I have to start looking it up, and it appears as a comic strip character from Doctor Who Monthly. We're doing that, and then it's in the new show. Okay, so then images started to appear, and then I got it. It's a creature. I love creatures, and it's a nice little puppet, and it changes throughout the episode. So I threw myself into it that way because it's a nice creature to do. But when it came to doing the action figure, we got loads and loads of information from the BBC in terms of photograph and how to make this character in 3D. But a lot of the information was a little bit contradictory because you've got a puppet, which is a physical thing, and then you've got a CG version, which is their version of doing it. So none of the details quite matched up for things. And then you've got images that I was getting, I was finding them online of the CG character walking and turnarounds of it, and it didn't seem to quite match what was in the final show when you look at it interacting with people. And there was all these differences that had to be blended together, really, so you could get that is the character rather than it being one particular thing, because it was never right for all of them. So we had loads and loads of photographs of the turnarounds of the puppet as well. So that was a primary source for getting detail. And then there was CG versions of it pulling the expressions, and you had to pause it at the right moment, because Al said he wanted to do two heads. He wanted to do a placid, smiling version, a cute version, and an angry version, an angry, evil version. Now, if you say to someone, I want an angry, evil version, and they go through the information and find a picture of something that looks angry and evil, that's not necessarily what's in the mind of the person who's saying it's angry and evil. So that's when we had a little bit of a, is it right? Well, yes, it is right to the pictures that I've copied. Oh, but it's not those pictures I want. It's that expression. Oh, that's what you're calling angry and evil.
So you're saying it's all down to El's briefs, isn't it? It's El briefing you on the project.
Yeah,
I've done it very top line, and it was one of those situations where Andrew sent the sculpts back to me, having done them as usually brilliantly, and I kind of immediately went, oh, I'm looking for I'm thinking more like this and more like this. He quite rightly said, well, you know, if you pick the expression you want, I'll copy that. But if you don't tell me, then I'm sort of guessing. So yeah, back to Andrew.
I think it was mainly the angry one, wasn't it, that was causing the
and I think because so we pulled I think some of the data you got, I think, was, and you've mentioned it, was so weirdly, or not weirdly, but we asked the BBC and their 3D team to pull the 3D data, which had now been archived because it was so long after the event, and then that was passed to Andrew. And one of my initial comments was that the snout looked very pointed versus what you saw in the show, where it looked quite fluffy. But I think it was a case of, partially I think it was a case of, because I'd been quite loose with the brief, I think Andrew rightly had sort of not known whether I wanted the CG version because I'd given them all that data, or something more literal to what we'd seen on screen. So it was just a case of me literally not saying this is what I want. And I think we've said it before, but one of the things about Andrew is he's very, you know, you are very literal in like, tell me what you want and I will do it. But you don't kind of like, and I really love working with Andrew because he will always come back with, he'll never unquestioningly follow something he's been asked to do, never. And that is actually quite, I would say, unusual, but it's actually quite useful. So he will never just accept a brief. He will normally come back with a ton of questions and then a ton of reference material, and then he'll say, take your pick and I'll do whatever you want. But he did come back with a lot of questions, and he always does. And that's actually better in the long run, because we've done a couple of things recently that we can't sort of talk about, but they're going to be coming out, and I've sort of said, oh, it's, yeah, follow this, it's this color, and then he'll literally go, look, it's not. And he'll never do it just to prove a point. It is to prove a point, but it's kind of say, well, Al, you've made an assumption, but I'm not sure it's the right assumption. So it's kind of, you know, iron fist and a velvet glove.
The initial arms, they were different. The first set of arms we did, because we didn't quite know how it was going to work as a figure. Because when he sits there placid, he's got his arms up and he's doing this a lot. But it was initially sculpted with his arms out. And the way the fur went, it followed the arm, and it was quite short, because we thought if you articulate that and put joints in, it's going to move around, and the fur's not going to fall down naturally the way it does in the show, because it's quite long and shaggy. No matter what you do with the arm, that fur's going to hang down. So if you start pulling it up, it's going to hang down there. If you're doing that, it's going to hang down that way. So it was shortened, and it followed the arm a little bit more, but it didn't quite look right, did it? It didn't have the character when he did this.
I think it's
something.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I remember that then led to hand gait as well, didn't it? Because I sort of said when he's placid, he has to have the hands up, and you said, well, then his hands have to be in a completely different position, and then the fur. Because
when you sculpt it like that, and then you extend the arm, it's still going to be doing that. Yeah. So you're going to want to take the hands off and do something else with them. So it ended up with, I think, 6 sets of hands, didn't it?
In the show, he's kind of a big ball of fluff, but like Andrew's alluding to, as an action figure, you can't quite follow that aesthetic. So it did end, because
we didn't quite know how the hands were going to fit into the arms either. So I put tiny little balls on the end in case they ended up being wrist joints that did that sort of thing, but they would have been really fiddly to do. So they've just ended up with plugs on, so they just have a twist in the end. But originally there was enough movement to do that if it went that way, but we just weren't sure how much it was going to cost to do that sort of thing anyway. So it was just felt that do 6 hands that would plug in.
It was an odd one, wasn't it? Because we kind of, I kept sort of saying, I need kind of a hand to do this. I was like, well, we need to think the hands up were the later ones, weren't they? But then we had the hand with the bandage, and then the hand without the bandage. even though actually in the show, I don't think he's ever without the bandage on his hand, maybe right at the end. So that was different. And then obviously there was the blaster version and a sort of general hand, normal hands, if you want to call it.
Because he had to have the bandage on when he had the blaster, didn't he?
Yeah.
That was in the show. And that was done slightly differently as a sculpt, because it was unsure whether the gun was going to be a separate item. It has been manufactured separately, but it glues in, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's got a plug.
Yeah, exactly. You did it, I think, with them as two separate pieces, and then what they did is they obviously extended a peg out from that into the palm of the hand.
But it was also done as if it could be. If you look at that image, it's all in one, because it's a separate plug in hand. It might as well have the gun molded into it, and he's holding it properly, because he's got all these tiny loops on the gun where his fingers go through it. But it's not ended up that in production, is it? The hand goes around it more, because it's all a little bit chunkier. Because it was just too, it's just too small and fiddly for them to be able to
That's exactly why it ended up as it was, because it came. There was a discussion internally with my engineer where I sort of said, "Oh, let's have it as a separate accessory." She kind of said exactly what you were saying, Andrew. She said, "Well, it's going to have to be bigger, and then it becomes almost sort of oversized." And in the context of the TV show, the gun's almost kind of like he's got it hidden somewhere, or it's got it hidden somewhere, and he kind of whips it out. And kind of, so it then ended up like, well, then just glue on. My concern was it'd have to be done in kind of like it could end up looking like a sort of amalgamated blob. But actually, as soon as they said, well, it'll be a separate part with a peg, I was like, well, cool, fine.
I mean, it's such a tiny little detail as well, but I had no information on what the gun looked like other than screenshots from the show.
I think there was one sketch that I sent to Andrew, and it's concept sketch. It wasn't even the final one, was it? It was just like it took a lot of analyzing photographs and researching online to find out what that thing looked like when it's not in his hand, so I could get the handle and things right. But it's a lot of research.
Speaking of fine details, am I seeing almost like little bits of blood on those knuckles there, or is it
no? Like there was so he does have hands that have slight. In fact, one of the early issues I had was he kind of
the red bits across there.
Yeah, he just has sort of slightly pinky knuckles, but it didn't quite match the ears early on. It was a sort of different color, and I kind of went, "Ooh, that's a bit odd," because it should kind of match the ears. I had a sort of general issue anyway, which was that because he's quite white, and then the bandage is white, but if you watch it in the show again, you can see the bandage is quite stark. So I kind of went for a slight sort of pushed them to sort of make his hand fur slightly darker so that you can see the bandage. But he is compromised I mean, you can see he's and it's a good example when his arms are sort of tucked into his body, the way Andrew had sculpted it very much forms that sort of nice round fluffy hamster blob that's going on. But obviously, as an articulated figure, as soon as you move the arms up and away from the body, his body suddenly becomes that sort of V shape. But it's one of those things where, and to be, and Andrew figured all that out kind of on his own in a way, because I didn't sort of discuss it with him, but actually it helped our engineers enormously, because had he sculpted it as that kind of amorphous blob, I'd have been very much reliant on the factory getting that right. And actually, once Andrew had changed the fur on the arms and made it longer and a bit shaggier, when the arms are down, it kind of, like I say, it just creates that kind of blob. But it's one of the compromises you have to make on figures. I wanted it to waist articulation, so I did have to kind of say to them, here's the place I want the split to go. Andrew had done it already completely on the head and on the shoulders, so there was less. I would say that it was a relatively straightforward process because Andrew had thought a lot of the sort of details of actually well, I don't know. I haven't asked him, but I don't know whether that was conscious or unconscious. But in essence, he'd already figured out a bunch of the sort of limitations of, well, if the arm moves out and there's an arm-shaped space in a big blob of fur, it's going to look crap. So he'd kind of done all that for us.
For the second set of arms, we actually still didn't know how they were going to make these things, whether they were going to be sculpted in place or whether they were going to have articulation at the elbow.
Yeah.
It still hadn't been figured out. So I actually sculpted 3 arms for the second set. The arm that held the gun, it was more extended forward than it was when they're up doing that.
Yeah.
So he had 3 arms. But then the factory managed to put articulation in the elbows, so you could do that anyway. And they've done a really nice job on the elbow in the way it's hidden, in the way the fur is a bit shaggy around there, and it covers it up. So
the alternative means we just get a static figure. So to put that much effort into creating a posable figure out of all that, it's a great addition, because otherwise it's just that non-moving.
Which is why you were never going to get the legs moving, because although he does walk around in CG, to get that shaggy fur to work, it would compromise the figure too much.
It looks much better, doesn't it? It doesn't stand upright. It walks in that squat pose.
Yeah, they're still bent, but they've still got to move through a massive fur, and it just wouldn't work.
That movement in the arms, you've got that joint from the legs to the waist. It's like that ball joint where it moves forwards, backwards, side by side, which I think we've discussed previously with other bits and pieces. But and the same as the head, where being the interchangeable, which was the big bonus for this one, and obviously having the happy and the angry meep, conversations. I guess going back, having that initial conversation, I guess, and deciding how you're going to present this, because this is the latest in the Vortex range, with more to come. But obviously this was the next one to come out, and obviously the thought process behind, we're going to make something that's a bit higher end. We've got higher paint apps, slightly more detail, and obviously the Meep's a brand new character, so obviously that's completely new tooling and investment to make something like this, to add it in. But I guess, and then to have the hands and the heads, it's going to another level, and I guess that's what you guys or characters aiming for with that.
The hands came along, I would say, later in the day, because I kept, like we already discussed, I did go back a couple of times to Andrew and say, can we do another set of hands? Can we do another set of hands? And that sort of happened. The alternate head was in there almost from the beginning, because I remember that cartoon strip, and he is a psycho. He is properly, at least in the comics, probably not even on screen as much as he was in the comics, but in the absolute psychopath. He went from being calm to just being completely, just ruthless gig. And so, I couldn't see a way of doing a Meep without doing a second head, to be honest. It sort of, or you do a Meep and then further down the line you give them an angry Meep. But it seemed more of a compromise in a way.
Did you ever think about doing an alternate drop in the boxes, so you get one angry Meep in one packet, another packet of
I did.
We have Meep cake.
Yeah, it seemed like a good way to piss everyone off.
Like the cyber lieutenant, the cyber leader.
But I think if you're paying high-end money for a character, it seemed the right thing to do, to give them both. And it's nice. The only issue you have is you have a decapitated Meep head.
We're going to do this.
Decapitated Meep head and a couple of hands. So somebody somewhere is probably going to build a Predator style spaceship.
While we were just talking there, Al, I had an idea. If this sells well, imagine Meep, this little fella, with a Santa hat on as a Christmas exclusive, just for a bit of fun.
Well, never say never. I do like.
Don't give him ideas. Don't give him
no,
ideas.
Was there
Was
any challenges with this? Obviously, with the interchangeable head and obviously the peg system and stuff. Was that a pretty straightforward sort of process? Was there any challenges?
It is, but you have to then set up a set of parameters to work for with all these things. So pulling off the head can't be too difficult. To be honest, I was never worried about the head. It was more the hands.
Yeah, that came a little bit.
The hands are a pain in the ass to pop in and out. That becomes more of a problem. And they're even on the Star Wars figures, which were kind of emulating to a degree, you still have that issue that if you push it in too fast, it will bend, and the PVC. You got to kind of almost put your finger over where the joint is and push it together. So there's
always the option of
complications. So, sorry, I was going to say the parameters of that is that in the factory they had to then test that you could put the hands in and out. So I was like, have we tested the hands? And we make sure, and they're like, yeah, we, they've put the hands on and off 1,000 times, and I'm like, well, okay, that's good. I'll take that.
Which leads me to something else here, Al. There's some images that you've kindly provided to us. Do you want to just talk through that in relation to the head in your hands there and what's behind?
Yeah, so the 14th Doctor on the left is really just on the right rather, left and right, never a strong point with me. So that was really to showcase the new head and the difference that recast head makes. I think it does. The one on the right was because every time I got a slight hassles with the Meep, because I kind of just wanted them glossier and glossier, and every time and Andrew and his compatriots at Design Works had done the beautiful Paint Master, which is then followed in the Far East. So Alex and I think it was Alex or Steve that worked on the Meep, but anyway, every time it came back, I was like, make the eyes more glossy, make the eyes more glossy. So this was one of the images I received from the factory where they were just basically trying to convince me that the eyes were glossy enough. So that is literally the sign-off one where they took a picture of it and said, are these glossy? And I went, yeah, okay, that'll do. That's glossy enough.
I got to say, the detailing in those eyes is just absolutely incredible. I mean, it's what, 4 millimeter diameter, and you manage to get, or your factory on yourselves managed to get that so detailed when you zoom in on those eyes, whether it's under a magnifying glass or
they are very good. And technology on that side, not technology, but the skill level on that side has definitely marched uphill. I had an interesting conversation this week about, so I got the Revenge of the Cybermen set from B&M sent to me, and I'd made a few changes to the paint ops on that, including getting the eyes decoed darker, because I don't like Cybermen when they're just sprayed silver, because the eyes never look right.
There's no dimensionality to them.
Yeah, and so they've done it really nicely, but the mouth then had, because it's not deep, the mouth was silver, and I said, oh, any chance we can improve the mouth? And my engineer actually said, I don't think so. That's a hell of a small spray op. It's about 0.5 mil deep. Oh, sorry, in sort of physical parameters, it's 0.5 mil deep, and I don't think they're going to be able to do that. And the factory came back and said, yeah, that's no problem, we'll do that easy. So
it's just like mini masking that goes over the
if you look at the Meep's teeth, I think in conjunction with the eyes, I think
Meep's teeth, all right.
You're like, which is something that classically we've never, I think Andrew again is probably a good one to talk about this, but we always shied away from showing any teeth, because I think we all came to the conclusion that they had to look right, they had to all be back mounted and kind of in there. We always ended up with slightly sort of pissed off looking neutral figures because nobody ever grinned or smiled.
The Meep's mouth, I suppose, it is quite wide, and the teeth are very sharp and pointed, but you need that black background to bring them out. So looking at the puppet and looking at the CG, it's got a different set of teeth in there. so it was compromising which they look like, and they're a lot finer when you blow it up on the screen and it's filling your screen, and you're sculpting this tiny set of teeth. They're ending up being 0.3 of a millimeter wide, which is no good for a toy. So you have
I'm
to
just
beef
getting that
everything.
to look at how big they were.
So you have to beef it up and still make it look like the character and still make it work.
0.3 of a millimeter.
Yeah, they were like hairs. It was
How
ridiculous.
did you? Sorry, Andrew, I've got a question for you. How did you work out? Because the height, I would say, for the Meep is absolutely bang on in terms of height against figure, and I don't think that's anything we ever discussed. How did you figure that one out? Did you just reference
that was looking at images of it next to people in the show? Well, and they're always at a funny angle. You're looking down a bit, so there's a lot of guesswork. And some of the turnaround pictures we had of the puppet, I'm not sure if there were people stood behind it and things. So it was a bit of a guesswork about where it came up to on an average sized person, where the top of the head was. So yeah, it was guesswork.
Do you do comparisons as well? Do you do comparisons with like the character range of figure, like a random figure to put it up against when you're doing that modeling or whatever as well? So
yeah, I did import various figures that we'd done that we had digital sculpts of to see where it came up to, and then just visually did it so it looked right, and then said that is the size, that's what it needs to be.
I did send Andrew a couple of sort of Formlabs prints, thinking I was very clever, and of course not realizing that he has a Formlabs printer about 20 feet away from him, and he'd probably already done it. So I was like sending him this, going, have a look.
Oh, we hadn't because it takes time to print them, so it was probably busy doing something else. So yeah, I've got those on my desk now, pretending we printed them. So
it was like, I kept saying,
but it's not until you hold it in hand and you look at it and you go, bloody hell, that detail on the face is really small. You're analysing it on screen and you're blowing it up and you're trying to map this sculpt underneath the photograph. So you know the eyes are the right size, you know all these bits fit, and then you take the photograph away and you go, is that right? And then Al might say, oh, can you just change the eyelids or something? And then you start measuring how much you've done it by, and it's again 0.3 of a millimeter, and it makes
are they happy or angry eyelids?
Exactly.
If we rewind the clock back, is this the perfect time in the production of the CO figurine range to have made this? Could we have made this? Could you have made this in this much detail 10 years ago?
No, I would say no, because we'd have well, two things would have happened. One, I think arguably the tooling has got sharper, and obviously the way we tool is a different way. The actual digital sculpt would in essence have been, I suspect, no different, but the tooling model, which contributes to the tooling or informs the tooling, and the end result wouldn't have been as good, and we'd have slapped paint all over it. So no. It probably is, because in essence that figure is white plastic with spray ops.
Yes.
Or off white plastic with
you can see inside there the color of the plastic.
One of my favorite times to see any figure is the tooling model, because they do it in a sort of salmon pink, and it's a very high resolution printer that they use. But when I see these, it just shows the level of detail that you're working with, which really shows
like when you compare the it's like in the latter stuff with the test shot figures, like the Tom Baker one I had there of the Deadly Assassin. Like to see that in its true form before the paint apps, just the detail that gets printed out in those things is remarkable. But then, and that's why I guess we're going to the new protocols now with, like, say, the humanoid figures and so forth that have the skin tones, and that printing the plastics now and minimal paint apps on it. Just
joking aside, look at the fur on that. Is that all hand sculpted, Andrew, or do you have like a fur brush that you can just go?
A fur brush.
Sometimes I wish I had a fur brush, but no. Sometimes I like to sculpt an area and then copy that as a patch and move it over and then change the fur and go over it. That can happen.
That is just
some parts of it might be mirrored, but I try not to make it look like a mirror. I try and go over it and slightly alter it.
It really doesn't. It looks it's absolutely. That's what I mean when you see it like that when it's translated from that digital file in as close to raw form as possible. That's just stunning.
Yeah, because you never know when the factory do it if they're going to fill in areas around, let's say around the ears. I try to fill in as much as possible with fur, so it didn't go in too much. But you never know if they're going to need more filling in. I think it might have done as a plastic toy than what the digital sculpt actually had, but it's all guesswork because you never know what their tolerances are going to be sometimes, whether they can get it out of a mold. But looking at the arms, they've done a really good job of pulling all that fur out.
Yeah, and it's still massively compromised on the arms in terms of the sheer amount of. I mean, obviously you got the ball joint, rotational joints at the shoulders, but you can't. I think Andrew said it earlier. He did actually sculpt us a more extended gun arm, but you can't fully extend the arm even when it's got the gun in it. So it kind of looks slightly compromised, but that's just
it is. There's a compromise either way, because if it had gone the other way, the arms would have been in a set position.
Yeah.
And the gun arm would have been in a set position. The arms doing that would have been in a set position.
So the option would have been to provide another arm where the arm pops off and then a gun arm pops in.
Well,
that's what it was.
There was a point where that was discussed because at the time it looked like the Meep arm was going to be so small that, again, my engineer wasn't convinced we could put an internal pin joint in the arm and kind of make it work, which I think is what then led to me going back to Andrew and sort of saying, can you do me different arms? Because he did do a bunch of different arms. He did like standard arms, the praying mantis arms, and then the gun arm. So there was different arms, as he says. But we're always sort of pushing to try and kind of. But it is compromised. That's always my bit of the job, is deciding where are we gonna compromise this, because there's always on everything. It doesn't matter with a sonic screwdriver, and you got to decide that there's a screw got to go in somewhere, and it isn't on the prop, and you got to decide where you put the screw cap and hide the thing, or
where you got to put the copyright BBC logo.
Yeah.
And speaking of compromises, just segueing to the tenant figure, some of the discussions we've had, Al, in relation to getting that final look.
Just final tweaks in terms of sort of trying to bring out the textures. Where possible, obviously, we want to use the base plastic because it's got the texture and the detail on it. With the hair, when I got the samples, it felt a little bit flat, so I asked them to add a sort of wash to the hair just to kind of go into the sculpted hair parts and kind of bring a bit more 3D to it. And normally my default position is add 10% black or add 5% black. So it was literally like, this is a perfect example of the EP is in the middle. So that's engineering prototype. The one on the left has 5% black wash added to it, and the one on the right has 10%. I think I went with 5% in the end. I normally do. And then similar on the back of the jacket, the in-mold color of the waistcoat seemed a little bit flat. So again, just to bring up that texture, it was a case of giving it, we call it a dirty wash white, but in essence, it's a weathering pass.
Dark wash.
Yeah. And it can work. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it just looks pant, to be honest.
I think this is the improvements that the third gen printing and the process works on that. And we can actually completely see it now, the comparison between the first 14th head and now this 14th head. and it looks fantastic. The new skin color mold, it really does. Which kind of
I know people probably end up buying a second one just so they can pop the head off the long coat version now, or there'll be cries of burning.
Unfortunately, it's not a peg. It's a plug, I guess. It's not just popping on and off.
Yeah.
You've got to crack open the torso to get the base of it out. So moving forward, I mean, I don't want to sort of like put ideas in your head.
No, you never do that.
We're not talking about standardizing the way we do things, are you, Shane?
Coming to other doctors, the third doctor was very much, I think we discussed in that you had the existing body, you had the existing head. That was a new head, but the way that could then take that new head. So other doctors in the range, when you get to Vortex them, that's not a bad way, the Vortex upgrade, will you be able to then do those heads again in that new third gen style if they can pop on comfortably?
I'd probably go a slightly different route because I'm much fonder of the ball jointed head, where the head is actually on its own articulation point, be that a double ball, or at either end of a pin, so that it's got a little bit of. It doesn't seem like it, but if you can actually tilt a head slightly to one side, it's a bit, or sort of forward or back, it's a bit more natural. I'd probably on something like 14, or a fourth Doctor. I'd love to. I think Andrew and I are both kind of like in the. If we could get to do another Tom Baker head, we'd probably both be really happy. And if it meant it was a Vortex edition head with swivel joint at the neckline, and you could do different, if in my head we'd have a nice season. I'd love to do a season 12 and a season, like a bookend set of figures. Season 12 and a season 18 with a maybe a med gloss and a old Tom head stuck in there as well.
You do, of course, know there is still one accessory that has to come with any fourth Doctor release, and that is the little bag of jelly babies.
Andrew sculpted, I don't know if it was you, but we did sculpt accessories for every single Doctor originally in the classic series. And again, over to Andrew. He will tell you.
Yeah, even trying to find out what kind of jelly babies he had at the time.
It wasn't always jelly babies. Sometimes it was
they weren't.
And he pretended they were jelly babies. And
they're all sorts and everything, weren't they? Well, now you've done the Meep like this, holding the gun, an interchangeable hand with the fourth Doctor holding the bag of jelly babies. It makes the accessory not need to be oversized to fit in. It's just part of a hand.
Yeah. No, as I say, I mean, I'd love to do it. Sorry, Andrew, I'll cut you off there.
I was going to say, the thing about doing a bag of jelly babies, it could just be a white bag because you don't actually see what's in it. So I had to fill it full of jelly babies and have them almost teaming over the top, so you could have a bit of colour, and you could see that it's a bag of jelly babies rather than just a crumpled white bag or something.
Yeah, we had a bunch of stuff, didn't we? We had a cricket ball and bat for the 5th.
Yeah.
We had the Sonic Lance for the 6th, I think, didn't we?
You released that.
He was a difficult one to find an accessory for, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Because he didn't have a Sonic.
No.
He had
that Sonic
an episode with the Lance, didn't he?
Yeah.
So we thought that's got to be the only thing that would go with him.
Yeah.
And Sylvester McCoy had his question mark umbrella, didn't he?
Yeah,
so
which we've never done. And then I think second Doctor was
we did the umbrella.
Oh, we did.
We did do it. Yeah. I remember doing that.
And we did the recorder, obviously.
We did the record for Patrick Troughton.
And then I think the cane was the first Doctor one.
First Doctor.
Yeah.
And then McGann had his Sonic.
Yeah.
What did the third Doctor have? Oh, he had his Sonic as well.
His Sonic.
He had his Sonic.
Need a Metabilis crystal and a dematerialization circuit for him somewhere down the line. Maybe we'll get
options for future releases. Hey, Al.
Well, this is what the new production methods in the third gen are opening up. The detail is, you can get detail in that finer pieces that fine.
And I think Andrew and I's heart always remain firmly in the what you would call the classic series, I suppose.
Well, it's what you grew up with, isn't it? That's the Doctor, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think even David Tennant, I think, thinks Tom Baker's the Doctor.
Yeah, that's true. It is definitely yeah, but it's I mean, the Meep is an interesting experiment and a whole load of new stuff. You know, it was multi-head, multi-hands. We've never done that before. You know, it doesn't mean we won't do something similar again if it presented itself and it made sense.
Blue version with a Santa hat.
It's a very different Meep. That's the only thing. Look, you're a customizer, Shane. My advice to you is buy two. paint one blue.
Al, every time you release something, there's always 3 at least getting purchased by me. Always.
Well, you know you're going to get the people who rip the head off one of the Tennant head and put it on the regeneration set, and then they'll have 2 Meeps. They can have an angry and a happy Meep standing next to each other. So there you go.
Good point.
Again, it's kudos. That set, if we'd just done the Tennant figure updated with something, say we'd released it as a single pack, I think it would have been all. It's 100% kudos to Andrew that Meep looks flipping stunning.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is. But it is one of my, of recent years, it's one of my favorite sculpts. It just looks good even when it's sitting there. And I always think that's a testament to an action figure. If you can just leave it on the shelf and it looks bloody amazing, your job has been done and done well. And it's that set just looks cracking. I would be very excited to see people's reaction. I'm sure somebody will hate it. Somebody will probably spend 45 minutes doing a little audio essay on why it's crap.
I was just thinking,
for me, it's really good.
I was thinking, what monsters could really benefit from this level of detail? Do you know what I thought about?
What?
Agador.
Yeah.
Agador with that sort of
God.
head.
I'd rather do Alpha Centauri than Agador or
2-pack.
With bonus
That came from the same story.
Alpha Centauri without his cloak.
Right?
Removable cloak.
Without his cloak.
Removable cloak.
Well, Agador would be stunning. It really
Who was
would.
the little guy? Who was the little guy in the tank? What was his name?
Arcturus.
Arcturus. I don't want to do him.
What? You don't like Agador?
He's a cuddly little bear.
Oh, you know what you could do? You'd have a push button on the back of Pertwee so it goes varun, varun, var.
I used to like Agador when I was a kid because I'd never seen the episode. It only existed in books because Pertwee's time had gone, and it was only in like the Doctor Who monster book, or it was in, I think we had Weetabix cards. And it was on that, and so I was fascinated by it. It was a big furry monster thing, so I had no idea. I don't know what you're talking about, Agador. Do Agador, Al. Do it. It'd be great.
It's up there with the
packaging
Taran apparently.
with that statue Agador in the background. You know, I'm picturing the throne room or the what was it?
Agador and Agador statue as the Vortex edition.
The Pelican miners with their foam hair was probably worth doing.
Actually, your beard there, I was looking a bit Agador minerish. Agador miners are a bit red and grey, weren't they?
They were descended from ginger colonists.
They had that.
100%.
No, that's good. Another thing I wanted to have a look at is just this in what makes it, decisions to put packaging together and so forth. So this is obviously just a couple of pre-variations before the final product is laid out. I guess this is just something you do to work out how it's going to look best when it's produced, isn't it?
Yeah, we always do white mock-ups, and they always do a blister mock-up, and invariably I change my mind or change something because I'm not 100% happy with it.
And having it, yeah.
So yeah, it was having the issue I had with this one was it kind of looked a bit like the Meep was levitating. and then on the left-hand one, and then his sort of disembodied head was underneath. It's not a bad pack out, but because we were putting an image behind it of the inside of the, I mean, in general, I kind of don't like figures floating anyway, even if the feet just touch the top of the sort of Oricum level with the top of the edge of the card. It always looks maybe slightly better, like they're not levitating. But it seemed to me it made more sense to have the Meep level with the Doctor to show his scale relative to each other, and then put the accessories above it. That was all.
No. All right. So yeah, look. So by the time this video is out, I think you know, it'll be available to order online from Character, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people. They either like it for the Star Beast new episode with Tennant, or like me, they might pose it with their Tom Baker figure in K9 and go back to the reminiscence of the Marvel comics. But yeah, so look, I think it's a great little figure. And again, another step forward in the Vortex range. Very reminiscent, like you're looking at things like the Back to the Future figures with the multiple Marty hands and accessories and things. And I think that's because obviously we're now looking at a collector's sort of market now these days compared to, as we've discussed previously, when you know the figures were being pumped out in their thousands and thousands. We've now got a lot more targeted audience, I guess you'd say, these days, and so the runs are not as high, but so I think addressing things like this for the collectors is a great thing. But Shane, have you got anything more specific you'd like to ask in relation to?
I did have questions, but we've kind of covered it all just in the general chat. I don't think there's anything in there that I would throw in. Personally, I think they're a fantastic set of figures. I mean, the improvements on the David Tennant is fantastic and really looks great. And the Meep, the first thing I got to say when I looked at that was just the eyes. It's like, my God, it's got character in those eyes. You can see the character.
That I think is where you're going to see the biggest difference going forward on the figures is, and obviously it started with a Pertwee one, but I think when the other ones do eventually emerge, I think what you will see is exactly that's the days of the sort of slightly neutral, static, even if it's just a head. I know a head is static to a degree, but I think, and Andrew's worked on a couple of the upcoming ones that are coming out as well, but I think you will see there is a bit more depth and sort of emotion comes through with the figures, and I think that's right. I think the days of the sort of statues, or sort of, or the statue passive versions of the action figures are maybe gone to a degree, but Andrew certainly brought a hell of a lot of life to the Meep figure and to, again, some of the other stuff that you're going to see.
I guess with the Meep eyes, it's the human eyes by comparison is so much smaller. So this is like a obviously exaggerated eyeball, and you can actually see and achieve that a lot. I couldn't see how you possibly, you may prove me wrong in the next upcoming months, but how you would have achieved, putting life into the eyes of a character that big or a figurine that big. So certainly look forward to it. No,
very good. Well, I think that's covered off our, the latest little release from Character. And once again, Al, thanks for joining us, and Andrew, and sharing some of the the process that goes into putting these wonderful little bits of plastic out on the shelf for us collectors to buy 1, 2, or 3, and for the customizers who'll probably buy more and start making their additions and get the blue spray paint out. And yeah, so
talent to the left, bad decisions and briefing to the right.
All right. Well, again, thank you, gents, for joining us, and we look forward to catching up another time soon. And and then obviously we've got some more things coming up in relation to ongoing classic figure chats. So I'm sure we'll have some more discussions about the evolution of the classic figures moving forward, and yeah, some fun stuff, and obviously nostalgic for all four of us, I think. So, once again, thanks, chaps, and we'll talk to everyone again soon.
Good night and good afternoon, all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Goodbye.